Welcome to Aquarian Diary, where we discuss issues around the emerging age of Aquarius. I'm your host, John Irving. Thank you for joining me. Greetings all, it is January 21st, 2022. I have a short window of opportunity to record, and I've really been struggling to figure out how to convey what I want to convey succinctly. What I want to talk about is something that I could easily spend 2 hours talking about and putting together all of the pieces of the puzzle as they've been coming to my mind. The main thing, though, that I want to talk about and try and convey, like I said, I'm concerned because I know this is going to be challenging to do. The most important thing I want to put out there, and I want to be on the record for this, is that I believe that in the near future, we are going to start to learn things and perceive things that have been going on for decades that we were not privy to before. And I believe that many of these revelations will be really shocking and earth-shattering and very disturbing to a lot of people. These revelations and what will come out will cause us to reconsider contemporary modern history. And a lot of people are probably going to be very disturbed and upset by what starts to come out because of all of the implications. And I'm not actually about to say anything I haven't said before in various ways. I just think that what I have started to become aware of is that the scope and scale of it is bigger and deeper than even I considered. And I have had this awareness for a long time, and it became particularly acute for me when I was very involved in climate change, and I became aware of how vested industrial groups and corporations were gaming the system in very underhanded ways for their benefit at incalculable expense to the rest of humanity and our biosphere. And for me, this was very shocking because it was almost incomprehensible how anybody could act in such a capacity, how anyone could put their own profits and self-interests literally above billions of other people and countless other organisms and life forms. The scale and scope of it is so vast. This conspiracy, really what it is. And it's not conspiratorial for me to say this. There's vast amounts of tangible and very real evidence that validates what I'm suggesting. But we're now forward in time another couple decades, and what we're starting to become aware of, or what's starting to come out, is how the very rich, the plutocrats, the super wealthy, have gamed every aspect of society, from the education system to the healthcare system to politics to trade and finance, for their benefit at the expense of everybody else. And I think the scope and scale of that is going to literally be shocking and, like I said, very disturbing to many people. And it's not just happening in the United States. I read a lot from around the world on a regular basis, and I intentionally read from sources from around the world and listen to podcasts and things from credible and reputable sources. And I hear these things going on everywhere from, say, Peru to New Zealand. And there are patterns to what's happening, and they seem to be repeating themselves around the world. And I talked about the Powell memo, which came out in the early 1970s, which broadly articulated a strategy on the part of the wealthy to put society back in the box. And if you think about something like education, how education now is so expensive that young people are effectively in a form of indentured servitude where they have to work and earn significant amounts of money just to keep their head above water and can never get ahead. And a lot of people think that, well, that's just people trying to make money off education. And I would go further and say, no, that's actually to control young people. Because what they don't want to have happen is they don't want young people to rise up against the establishment like they did in the 1960s, which threatened the hegemony of the elite and super wealthy. And so when people have huge amounts of debt hanging over their heads, one, they don't have a lot of free time, and two, they are afraid to speak out because it puts them at financial risk. And of course, if you want a healthy, prosperous society, it's common sense and well known that you need people who are well educated. So this plays against society in two ways. One, it keeps young people in this form of indentured servitude, and two, it undermines society. So that's one example of how it's very insidious and people haven't quite connected the dots. It occurs to me quite often, I hear people talking about things and they're focusing on like fragments of politics or events that are occurring in society or around the world. And I'm like, I'm always often shocked and sometimes even angered because people do not seem to be connecting the dots. What I'm saying is that many of these apparent and seemingly disconnected, anti-democratic and irrational movements that we're seeing occurring around the world are not just happenstance. Democracy itself is a threat to the establishment. Democracy itself is a threat to the hegemony of the ultra-wealthy. And they are deliberately undermining democracy and destabilizing democracy to maintain control or enhance their control over society. Another example, in the province of Ontario, recently in Canada, the premier, I guess akin to a governor in the United States, the premier recently opened up forms of access to privately held medical care in ways that are kind of antithetical to our traditional perspective as Canadians on how healthcare should be delivered. Now, a lot of people are welcoming this because they're saying, well, the healthcare system is in a crisis. We need to do something. And by giving people more options to go and pay for healthcare from private firms, it'll help alleviate those problems. Well, the real problem is that the medical system has been chronically underfunded and understaffed for many years. If you are a medical provider or somebody who could benefit from private forms of medical health care, you want the public system to fail because that creates an opportunity for you to make money. And so the point I'm trying to make is that many people are applauding this, saying, oh, this is great. You know, I won't have to wait as long to get cataract surgery or whatever. When the real problem all along is that the public system has been allowed to deteriorate to the point where now people are willing to accept the privatization of some aspects of our medical care system. And it's an extremely slippery slope. The public system can still deliver healthcare much less expensively than any form of private medicine will. This is simply a fact. So it's kind of like disaster capitalism. You degrade a system to the point where it becomes untenable, and then you offer a commercial system which will generate significant profits for investors at the expense of the public. And it's disturbing to me that people are dumb enough to not connect these dots, but yet that is exactly what happens because many people are very short-sighted, poorly informed, and not very smart in many cases. That's another example. So by weakening democracy and systems that support individual people, it creates opportunities for the privatization of many aspects of society where significant amounts of the profits will go to a handful of people. Oxfam recently came out with a report showing the staggering amounts of wealth that have gone into the hands of the plutocrats over the past few years, as opposed to the general public. It's like we're going back to, 1915 or something like that. Which, if you're a plutocrat or an oligarch, this is exactly what you want. These people have no ethics or morality other than their own self-aggrandizement, and they don't give a crap about anyone else. It's just like what we're doing to the biosphere. These people literally do not care. So there's that, which is that everything that's happening is not accidental and it's connected and it's international in scope. And I think we're going to find out a lot of details about what these dark money groups and dark money interests have been up to in the past few decades, probably when Pluto moves into Aquarius soon, starting in March. And then the other thing is we need to ask, well, how is any of this even possible? Well, the motive behind all of this, of course, is money. It's all about money. Some people have more money, other people have less. The root of all of these things is about money and power. Whether we're talking about drug cartels or corrupted government or elected leaders who are just gaming the system for their own personal benefit, we need to radically reform our monetary systems on a global scale in order to avert going into some neo-feudalistic, dystopic future, as well as to preserve a habitable biosphere. And I would argue that that issue right there about money and how wealth is accumulated, represented and used and stored will be one of the most significant shifts that occurs as we move from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. Why? Because of the way money is accumulated and distributed. It's not just about social injustice. It's not just about right or wrong. As I said, it's an existential threat to our survival. We have to change the way money is used, distributed, and acquired. Not just for our own best interests, but for the interests of everyone and everything that we care about and that we are utterly dependent upon for our very survival. There's a tremendous irony inherent in the reality that it is disparity itself, which poses the greatest threat to our well-being and survival. Not just privilege, but our survival. Lack of disparity would embody the Aquarian Age energy. The Aquarian Age energy speaks of all people being equal and their well-being being sacred and undeniable. And it is that perspective and outlook on reality that will save us, and nothing less. See my episode on Pluto in Aquarius. We literally can no longer afford to live in a world where some people are profoundly privileged while others live on a razor's edge of subsistence. Inequality itself is again, ironically, the root of our potential demise. It's that simple. So we must bring that down. We must end this cycle. We don't have a choice. Funny how the greatest lie in human history, that there isn't enough for all of us, turns out to be the most dangerous false belief of all. Because what happens is that people who are motivated by money alone, people who are greedy and narcissistic and sociopathic, if not psychopathic, are attracted to situations where they can generate huge profits. In other words, to empower themselves, and in some cases, dramatically, versus other people. This is what separates us and defines them. And so what happens is that these kinds of people end up in positions of power and authority in government and in business and corporations and so forth. Take any aspect of society. The worst kinds of people end up being at the top just because of the way the system is structured. And until we address that issue directly, head on, we will remain in an extremely perilous situation. It's gotten to the point now where literally the habitability of our planetary biosphere is in serious question. That is how dangerous and how bad the situation is, and it is directly because of what I'm talking about. The accumulation of wealth and power motivated by greed, self-interest, and narcissism, if not psychopathy. That's it. That's really the point of all of what I'm recording here today. If that is not point blank clear in our minds, we are missing the point of this whole episode, this epic episode of human history. The people who are determining our fate are the most corrupt and often criminal aspects of society. It's completely the inverse of what it should be. And I challenge anyone to arrive at a different conclusion than what I'm putting forward here. If you really think this through and look at the history, you cannot arrive at any other conclusion. You know, it's interesting. I listen to a lot of stuff, like I said, and there's some really great podcasts on the left side. I listen to a broad array of stuff, but just to make this point, like I continue to hear people on the left talk about how we need to reform the system and how to fix things. But I very rarely hear anybody actually speak about the actual core issue. What they are proposing are the same things that they've been proposing for decades, if not generations. The situation has not changed because the people in power are not rational actors, at least rational from our perspective. They are only motivated by greed and money and power. You can't have a rational discussion with somebody who's not rational, at least from your perspective. Minor tweaks around the edges are not going to solve this problem. You still have vast amounts of dark money calling the shots. You know, like here in Canada, another example is the government wants to give billions of dollars for these carbon capture projects for the tar sands industry. And it's a complete scam. It's just like there is not a shred of evidence, even after decades, that any of that is even tenable. And yet the government is going to hand billions of dollars of taxpayer money to the fossil fuel industry, who is creating the problem and undermining the science and corrupting meetings like COP for their own interests, blatantly, nakedly, and here we are giving them money, our taxpayer money. How is that possible? Now, I know what you're thinking. Just elect a different government. The problem is that the party that would be in contention to replace the Liberals would be magnitudes worse with respect to environmental concerns. And there really is only one other party who could unseat them at this point in time. Typical. It's always the lesser of evils. It goes without saying that these people can afford legions of astroturfers, troll farms, lobbyists, sophisticated and decades-long PSYOP campaigns, think tanks, dark money groups, political donations, and so forth, that you and I and the vast majority of people on this planet cannot. And thus they have unfair, unjust, and grossly disproportionate influence over the affairs of humanity and society. This situation is fundamentally anti-democratic and unjust, period, as well as literally an existential threat to humanity. And that is not hyperbole, that is fact, based on decades of very clear, irrefutable evidence. If people get too uppity and demanding about democratic reforms, well, you create a financial crisis. And now everyone is freaking out, figuring out how to pay their mortgage and their bills and their groceries. And that's all everyone cares about suddenly. A spike in oil prices will do that. It worked in the 1970s. It'll work in the 2020s as well. And it did. Average people can be severely harmed by something like a recession. The ultra-wealthy could survive for decades, even if we went through a Great Depression, assuming they're not total idiots. That is how much wealth they have accumulated. Another huge form of distraction is culture wars. While everyone is squabbling over idiotic culture war crap, the plundering goes on unabated. Yet people get sucked into those vortexes continuously. And it's all a ruse. It's a distraction. And your future, and the future of generations, is being sold off for profit at someone else's benefit. Celebrity culture, aka idolatry, another huge distraction. Stop talking about these people. You are tacitly endorsing a paradigm which enslaves you. These celebrities represent an infinitesimally small fraction of humanity. Realistically, the odds of you being them are like winning the lottery, virtually non-existent. People are always talking about politicians and political figures. They are the puppets. It's the puppet masters that we have to get to and talk about. The politicians, for the most part, are beholden to these special interests. The think tanks, the lobbyists, who are working on behalf of the plutocrats. And if they're not corrupted, they're compromised. It's very easy to get compromat on just about anybody these days. And with compromat, you can control them, even if they were a sincere and well-intentioned person to begin with. It's trivial to get compromat or fabricate compromat on just about anybody. When do people start waking up to this reality? I don't know. I hope it's soon, because it has to be soon. Perhaps this is part of the shift that we're going through. But we have to stop endorsing, tacitly or otherwise, these systems of governance and systems of organizing our society that are profoundly and criminally corrupt. Nothing is going to change until we do. And these people who want a neo-feudalistic, fascistic society will stop at nothing to achieve their ends. They literally don't care about us. We have to get over that. Like, stop believing. Like, even if you believe in the system that for generations has been oppressing you, you are tacitly endorsing your own enslavement and your own doom and peril. This is one of the things that drives me nuts, is that people just don't understand this. The paradigm itself is defunct. It is corrupt. It is dangerous. So, it's in the media, it's in the entertainment that we observe and that we watch, it's in our culture, it's embedded in our society in every conceivable way. It's part of our quote unquote reality. And we are past the point of incremental change. We need dramatic and radical change. The other option is that some kind of an enlightenment occurs on planet Earth, and maybe, as many people have talked about, maybe we will just rise into a higher state of consciousness and just see how things are. I mean, that's one possibility, and it's possible that that's happening. But what we're seeing, and this is what we would expect as we see Pluto move to the final degrees of Capricorn, is that the level of corruption and dysfunction just keeps getting more and more overt and obvious to everybody. And it's reaching astonishing levels. But like I said, the question is, what are we going to do about it? I honestly don't think that this is a situation where we can just go in and make, some incremental reforms here and there in the system. I think if this problem is not tackled head on, we are in collective peril. The most important thing I'm trying to get across is that people just really need to shift their paradigm. They really need to see reality differently for what it is. We need to let go of all of our beliefs and misconceptions about how things are and why they are the way they are, and just accepting things at face value. There's one more thing I need to say. If you think I'm exaggerating, let me share this with you. I have been extremely concerned about the global environmental situation for many years. And I have taken a lot of heat and a lot of flack for my perspective on that. But the only thing that has been true to date is that the prognosis continually degrades. In other words, the situation is now worse than even what we thought was going to happen 10 or 15 years ago. And it is degrading much more quickly than the vast majority of people who are very informed expected. Furthermore, we happen to be witnessing liberal democracies around the world under threat and buckling under strain from many directions. Is that coincidental? Probably not. One thing I can assure you of is that things are going to get worse, and potentially much worse if we don't do anything dramatic, before they get better. People do not want to hear this, and that is exactly the problem. People simply do not want to hear this, even though it's happening before our very eyes. We cannot afford to turn our backs on this. and incremental changes are not going to deal with it. We need to really think outside of the box. We most certainly do not want to pass significant tipping points if we haven't already. Tipping points being where we go beyond certain thresholds from which we cannot recover. That's all for now, I think. I'm I really needed to just get that off my chest. This has been stewing in my brain for months. And again, it's very consistent with a lot of things I have talked about in the past. Thanks for everything. Take care, and I'll talk to you again soon.